Just a Bit of Bread by Neon Zangetsu, Chapter 11, To Rise Above, Interlude. Impressive, most impressive, but you're not ready yet. Hey, you're enjoying this, aren't you? Why, whatever do you mean? 2 weeks later, To Rise Above, Interlude. Training begins now. Freya's attack came with only 3 words for warning, so sharp and sudden that Naruto barely had time to raise one of his shields. A torrent of ice slammed into his defenses, sending him skidding back 3 paces. Once upon a time, such a declaration would have ended with him flat on his back, a groaning insensitive mess down here in the vault. Now he grit his teeth and endured, uncaring as hoarfrost crept up his arms. His semblance flared to life, the eternal hunger that was his gift, draining the element long before it could turn his limbs numb. What was once strong became weak, brittle was false glass. A quick flick of his wrist shattered completely, sending the shards skittering across the floor. Freya regarded him across the vault, eyes burning with pale flames. Well done! She bounded in place, made giddy with his success. You've come far since we started. Naruto kept his eyes locked with hers, refusing to look anywhere else. There was no place for distractions in a fight. She'd used her beauty to distract him more than once in the beginning, entice him with one hand, then launch a devastating assault with the other. Suffice to say, 2 weeks of training had since endeared him somewhat to her surprise attacks. From that, he'd learned another valuable lesson. What can I say? He planted his feet and swung his arms back. I had a good teacher. Teamwork was all well and good, but ambushes were even better. A shadow appeared behind Freya. Thieves' respite barked. Emerald's attack skidded off a thick place of ice. Damn it! Naruto ripped his remaining shield from his shoulders, flung it forward like a frisbee. Freya laughed. See, told you, you weren't ready. Rather than retreat as any sane individual would, the revitalized maiden scoffed, slapped his shield aside like a piece of cardboard, and sent him crashing backwards with a wave of wind. His back hit the ground with the force of a sledgehammer, sending him skipping across the floor of the vault like a flung stone. Emerald joined him not a moment later, tearing another divot in the already sundered metal as she skidded to a halt beside him. Burning red eyes regarded pulsing blue, each training flames of their own. Why? She turned aside to spite a wad of blood onto the floor of the vault. Did we agree to this again? Because we're learning to control this power. Naruto pushed himself upright with a groan. And we need training. I get that, she groaned and wrenched herself upright. But what is he doing here? As if to echo those very words, the harsh bark of a familiar weapon reminded them that they weren't alone. Across the way, Pyrrha cried out as Crow kicked her to the ground. Blake didn't fare much better. She somehow evaded the next strike by virtue of her semblance and cut out at his leg, only for the wily brown wind to grab her by the scruff of the neck like a naughty kitten and slam her into the stunned redhead. Time out, the latter cried, scrambling back. We weren't ready. Life won't give you a timeout, princess. Harbinger cut down after the champion, forcing the younger girls to brave her shield with both hands or risk a punishing blow. This here's a trial by fire. Fight! The ribbon of Gamble's shroud wrapped around his neck, hauling him back. Pyrrha tumbled forward and took up her sword again. Her rifle barked, warding Crow back. Harbinger intercepted the bullets with a lazy twirl as the older huntsman gave ground, laughing all the while. Because he's sadist. And just where? Freya's voice crooned. Are you looking? The telltale bite of winter in the air was all the warning they received. Freya was relentless in a way only a fully realized maiden could be, her instruction even more so. While she tended to rely upon ice, the other elements were not beyond her. She was the eye of the storm, and the storm knew no mercy. Freezing winds blasted from her, and even as he clambered up on one knee, she flamed into another stance. A bare foot stomped down with impossible power. Nature responded in kind, sending a line of jagged eyes hurtling his way. Emerald was just a little bit slower on the draw, knees buckling before she could tumble to safety. No time to dodge. Naruto whipped out a hand, calling upon his new power. Blue eyes burned with azure flames. Beside him, Emerald mirrored the motion. The power of a maiden wasn't complicated, more a thing of emotion than anything else. It ever simmer just beneath the surface, aching to come out. It simply didn't like Naruto. This gift was meant to be used by a woman, not a man. Yet thanks to his semblance, this heavy power burned between him and Emerald both, ready It responded to one's emotions, and it answered the call now. An angry pillar of sapphire flame sprang to his hand and slammed against her frigid element. Heat warded against cold to no avail. For all his strength, Freya was infinitely more powerful. Her avalanche plowed on in spite of his attack, a wall of frozen death that would swallow him whole if he let it. And then, incredibly, it veered aside, ramming into a wall. Naruto heaved out a thankful breath as he climbed to his feet. "Thanks, Em." "What's our friends for?" His partner glided forward with a nod, sickles slicking out at her sides. "Clever girl." Their mentor applauded her ingenuinely. "That semblance of yours really is one of a kind. How they say your maiden powers have made it even stronger. But you'll never win like this." Naruto hummed softly, kicking his shield up into his waiting hand. Emerald drew her sickles back. The two thieves exchanged a sidelong look. Then they launched themselves at her. All the world descended into a mad whirl of combat, a wild waltz with no rhythm or reason. Limbs blurred, ice crackled, dust barked. It felt like an eternity to Naruto, when in truth their clash didn't last long at all, little more than 30 seconds. A shield bash transitioned into a flowing sweep with one of Emerald's blades. Freya stumbled as the chain caught her heel, and for a moment, just a moment, he thought they had her. Then she ripped her way free and caught their weapons with ease, arms crossed at her chest. "Did I ever tell you about my semblance?" Naruto gulped audibly. "No." "Let me show you." He didn't see what she did, but he certainly felt it. An invisible force hit him and Emerald at once, sending the duel flying into the air. Naruto's back struck a wall and he slid down it, head spinning. Freya landed atop him with a cheery smile. Breath whooshed forth from his lungs in a painful cry. "Ow! Not bad, boy. You're learning." He glared up at the ceiling. "Is that why I feel like death?" "Yep." The revigorated maiden smacked her lips with an audible pop. It takes a bit of concentration at first, but soon it'll be like second nature to you and that lass of yours." Emerald staggered up behind her, only for a fresh gust of wind to knock her flat. "See, I've had years to practice. In time, the two of you..." "Well," she tilted her head, regarding him with little eyes. "Are they say you'll be invincible?" An unintelligible gurgle greeted her across the vault. "Walk it off, dear. You think I'm rough?" She scoffed and flicked a stray strand of scarlet hair over her shoulder. "Wait till you meet Maria. When she gets here, she'll make this seem gentle by comparison." Naruto creaked an eye open. "Who? Don't know any Maria." "A dear friend of mine." The Winter Maiden looked away just a bit too quickly for his liking. "You'll like her, I think. She's got spunk." Blue eyes narrowed. "Freya." "No, whatever you're thinking." "No." "What?" The maiden looked away just a little too quickly. "All old people know each other. It's a thing." "You're not old anymore." "Is that so?" Freya cocked her breast and flashed him a saucy smile. "Why, you're right." She leaned forward, lips brushes the outer lobe of his ear. "How silly of me to forget." Naruto shivered. "But I'll leave you be for now." When she finally deigned to stand, she was grinning from ear to ear. "Would you want a dagger in my back? No? You two get some rest." She reached down and flicked his forehead just so, her fingers lingering on his forehead. "We'll continue where we left off tomorrow. Clairvea should be here in about a month or so. Until then..." Naruto watched her sashay away, hips swaying. He caught himself staring and shook his head. Honestly, he swore she was doing that just to get a rise out of him. At least Blake and Pyrrha were still putting up a fight against Crow. Then again, they didn't have a new power weighting them down, sapping their strength like a broken sieve. The thought rankled him. They were, all of them, improving, but it felt so slow. They needed to get stronger. Soon, something was coming for them. He felt it in his bones. He was still laying there, sprawling out on the floor when Emerald finally reached him. She didn't so much sit as she did fling herself to the floor. "I don't like her." His head shifted. "I don't." She rounded on him, eyes trailing scarlet flames. "Ever since you did that..." 10 hands flailed, failing to find the words. "She's been all over you. I'm not sure if she wants to adopt you or take you for herself." A spark of defiance shot through her gaze. "You won't let her, right?" "Of course not." He jutted a jaw-popping yawn. "I'm not that easy." He half expected her to kick him for that. Nothing happened, and he looked at her anew. Emerald gripped her wrist until he heard the bones creak beneath her grasp. "Please, never leave me." She'd been fearful lately. He didn't like that. Beacon was meant to be a fresh start, not this, and so he laughed instead. "Nope, never. You're stuck with me. till death do us part. She shifted but a little, tucking herself down into his side. Wait, didn't you say we were going to live forever? Ha! He chortled. Then that's what we'll do. An aching arm shifted, pulling herself against his side. Trust in me, I've still got a few tricks up my sleeve. A few tricks indeed. He still held a trump card, one he wouldn't use in combat, one he'd kept secret from the others. He'd not used it in, years, for good reason, due to the caveats that came with it. But the thief knew better. It was always best to keep an ace up one's sleeve. A power like that was dangerous in the wrong hands, downright intoxicating in others. He'd seen firsthand what the kind of semblance did. No, his ironclad rule held. This was something he would only ever use on an enemy, only in a life or death scenario, and only then only then word it couldn't be traced back to him. He hadn't let Jax's mind control semblance die with him back in the deserts of Vacuo. Perhaps that was weakness on his part, the inability to give up such a useful gift. He'd ripped it from the lunatic moments before his death. As a result, it was degraded, weaker than before. Part of him loathed holding onto it at all, while the rest of him regarded the ruthless pragmatism of it all. He'd held onto it because they needed an edge against their enemies, a means to defend themselves when all hope was lost, but still power in its own right, not all powerful. Emerald would be furious with him if she knew the truth. How fortunate, then, that he was such a good liar. Vacuo raced many things, but weaklings weren't one of them. So why did he feel sick to his stomach? Something had changed. Cinder could feel it in the air, but it meant she knew not. There were a strange tension in the air that hadn't been there before, a whisper of warning that only she could recognize. The signs were all there. One had but to read them. Team Nebula had been conspicuously absent from combat classes for the last 2 weeks, not from the main campus itself, but absent nevertheless. The team had kept mostly to themselves, much to the annoyance of others. Perhaps this was something to look into, perhaps not. After all, a man couldn't possibly inherit the maiden's power. It just wasn't possible. How little she knew. Previews. Adam quirked a brow. What is this? Right on time, Naruto gestured to an empty chair. Please, sit. He didn't budge. This isn't what you called me for. Master Thief, remember? Naruto crossed one leg over the other. I lied. I do that. Blake scowled in her own seat. This is pointless. We have nothing to discuss. No, the blonde lady said. I happen to think the three of you have a great deal to talk about. 3. He stepped aside, revealing Ilya. Adam struggled only a little, but the blonde's grip was ironclad. He let himself be wrestled into a chair. Blake burst to her feet. You're supposed to be on my side. I am. He pushed her back into her seat. But we need to hear them out as well. An arm came down on Ilya's shoulder, guiding the subdued girl into the fourth and final seat. None of us are leaving this room until we settle this. Roman swore. Shit. This changes things. We're gonna need more men. Fine. Twist my leg, boy, don't you? Maria sighed, straightened her aching back, and squinted up with her mechanical eyes. All right, I'll bite. Why did you bring me here, Freya? You look different. The revived maiden smirked. Noticed that yourself, did you? Coco clapped slowly. You came to the right person. Ain't nobody better than me when it comes to fashion. Emerald twitched. I'm already regretting this. Nonsense! The brunette sang and spun her round. Now let's get you ready for your date. The closet swung open, revealing an array of dresses. Emerald tried to bolt. Love it! Grab her! End of Chapter 11. Just a Bit of Bread by Neon Sangetsu. Chapter 12. Sterling Shadows of Silver. Coco, I need your help. Sure thing, Sugar Lips. What'd you need? How do I get a boy to ask me on a date? Ha! You've come to the right place. Right this way, my apprentice. Where's your boy at? He's got an appointment to keep. A month later. Stirring shadows. Some said Ironwood was more machine now than man. They weren't wrong, in a technical sense. Over half his body was pure metal, the legacy of a reckless, misspent youth. Even his semblance reflected this, what some called a superpower, the very gift of his soul. Metal strengthened his resolve, which in turn allowed him to carry through with his decisions, helping him hyperfocus. In the past, it helped him to do what must be done, to not hesitate, to show no mercy, to ever act in the name of the greater good above all, careful to prioritize that which was most important. The needs of the many overweighed the needs of the few. or the one. Sometimes one must sacrifice one soldier to save the battalion. Sometimes a violent criminal must be made an example of to prevent crime in the lower district. Sometimes diseased flesh must be cut away so the rest of the body must yet live. Some claim that made him twisted, monstrous, evil, but he wasn't. You see, James loathed his semblance, he despised it, hated it almost as much as he hated himself. In the brief moments when he was at peace, he wanted nothing more than to tear it from his body, cast it aside, and grind it to dust under his heel. It was passive, and always active in some form or another. When he was calm, he barely felt its effect at all, but when he was angry, when he was stressed, when he felt overwhelmed, then he became the machine. Or at least he had. Now he gazed down at his hands, metal and flesh alike. James felt more human than he had in a long time. There! Naruto backed away, lowering his still glowing hands. I did as you asked. You might be sore for a day or two. No. James pushed himself upright, wobbling only a little before he steadied himself. I'm all right. He stood with a grunt. Thank you for granting my request. No problem. The blonde regarded him worriedly, ears twitching atop his head. Still, I don't get why you wanted me to do this. It's complicated. The general braced himself against the wall and rose to his full towering height. I'll gladly explain to you once I've recovered. As you like, the ex-criminal shrugged. Not like I'm going anywhere. We done here. I got classes in the morning. Yes. James pulled himself into a chair and collapsed there. I am in your debt. I will repay you for this. You have my word. You want to repay me? Matchless blue eyes met his, and for a moment they shimmered with a hint of red. Make sure no one comes after me in Emerald. Do that, and we'll call it even. I shall. Naruto snapped off a lazy salute and left the way he'd come, leaving him with his thoughts. James released the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Only then did he allow himself to smile, to laugh openly. Finally, he all but croaked the word. I'm free. He asked the young man to meet him in his office and use his semblance to drain him, effectively bring him to the brink of death, then yank him back at the last instant. His theory had proven correct. There had been a moment there, a nanosecond in which he thought he genuinely would die here, fall to the floor, and never rise again. But in that moment, that sliver of a second, metal had screamed. James hadn't thought it was possible for a semblance to scream, but shrieked it had. He'd felt something break in his mind as he hung between life and death, then with it, the steel trap of his psyche. Naruto wasn't even aware of what he'd done. Naturally, he'd not taken his semblance, for James would still feel metal shimmering in the back of his mind, but he drastically weakened it. But what had once been an overwhelming presence that he had no hope of resistance was now little more than a nagging sensation in the back of his mind. He could fight that. He could resist it. His aura remained. His soul persisted. But that cold specter that haunted his ever thought was not merely a shadow of its former self. Oh gods, he was making jokes now. Perhaps that was a good thing. Even if it felt like someone took sandpaper to his soul, it would subside. Given time, leather creaked beneath him as he leaned back in his chair to regard the ceiling. His mind unspooled, contemplating the possibilities. This went beyond the pale. It was remarkable, impossible, downright miraculous. To restore the youth of an experienced soldier was one thing. To bring them back to the prime of their life with but a touch. But what he had just done opened yet more possibilities. He still didn't have the words for what he'd endured. He'd already given that young man his thanks, and then some, even gone so far as to apologize for his earlier rudeness. If he could weaken semblances, could he not also enhance them, perhaps even give them to others? Naruto Uzumaki could change the world. Best they play ball to keep him and his happy. If he took it into his head that he was being taken advantage of, or worse, actively used, they wouldn't be able to stop him, not with that semblance and the powers of a maiden at his beck and call. He had but to grab someone, and in minutes they would be dead. He'd seen the footage. He'd felt the pain that came in with having your very life drained away, then shoved back into you like a broken sieve. Sustained contact with that semblance had driven a greater Ursa. He nearly died in 5 minutes. Gods above, what would happen to Ospen, to a man who was denied death? He might simply die again, or cease to exist entirely. The Naruto semblance devoured soul as well as life force itself. The fact that he wielded two semblances that they knew of suggested as much, or was the soul, and the soul was what defined you, your semblance, everything. Naruto had taken the ability to teleport to any given marked location from another, meaning he'd killed someone, killed them, and taken their semblance, their soul for his own. Just the thought of it made him shiver. He understood now. The boy ate souls that went beyond death. No peaceful passing, no afterlife, just gone. You couldn't fight something like that. No, if you wanted to survive, if you wanted to survive the counter, if they sought to entrap him somehow, they would die. If they attempted to blackmail him, they would die. If they made him a weapon, they would die. Naruto was only one man and might well fall under sheer weight of numbers, but how many would he take with him? Dozens, hundreds, thousands. Who knew what other gifts he was hiding? After the boon he'd given him, James was content to let him keep his secrets. With his mind unburdened for the first time in decades, he could finally relax. A more wicked man might have used such a gift in the service of evil. Did such an ability make Naruto wicked? No. Any weapon was only as dangerous as a wielder, so it didn't swing themselves. He could have slain him just now, but instead he'd held to their agreement. That implied honor, integrity. At the very least, he could work with a man like that. James tried to rise, only to grimace as his aching muscles protested viciously. One did not simply die and recover in the blink of an eye, it seemed. Well, he sighed ruefully. It seems I'm sleeping here tonight. While his body recovered, his mind continued to whirl. He couldn't think of the boy as an asset now, only an ally. To do so otherwise would bring about ruin. If he established a rapport with Freya, that would link him to Atlas. If he was linked to Atlas, he would defend it. A gift like this could beat back Salem herself, possibly even destroy her once and for. No, that was the shadow of metal talking again. He was being hasty. Not this time. Ironwood braced his mind and quelled the impulse. His semblance receded with a sullen snarl. A triumphant laugh burst from victory over oneself came before a victory over your enemies. So long as he lived, and he must live, to that effect, they must protect him. He and his team both, whatever it took. No matter the cost. With trembling fingers, James fetched his scroll from his coat pocket and made a call. Winter, yes, it's me. Mobilize the Aesops. I have a mission for them. And you? Naruto wanted protection. He'd have the most elite guards Atlas could afford. Silent shadows, unseen protectors ready to swoop down on whoever harmed him. They could be discreet when pressed. Winter was certainly known outside of Atlas, but Harriet and the rest weren't. Unbidden, an idea began to form in the back of his mind. Yes, this could work. He would make it work. No one would touch Naruto Uzumaki. He would gladly take a bullet to ensure his survival. For all his flaws, James was also a man who paid his debts. He'd be repaying this one for the rest of his life. The month passed much as any other month would. Team Nebula seamlessly integrated themselves into their new life and lessons alike. Gradually, they began to settle down into some semblance of normalcy. Of course, that wasn't to say it was a quiet month. Life in Beacon seldom was. Adam corked a brow. What is it? He blinked once, twice, thrice now, for good measure. This was undoubtedly Port's classroom. Of that much he was certain. No amount of squinting on his part seemed to change that. Yet, no matter how much he blinked, he still found it empty when it should be occupied. Right on time. Naruto gestured to an empty chair. Please, sit. Adam didn't budge. This isn't what you called me for. What are you up to? Master Thief, remember? Naruto slapped his back and sent him tumbling forward. I lied. I do that. Not 3 steps in, he spied Blake in one of the seats. She looked as angry as he felt. This is pointless. She crossed one leg over the other and pointedly looked away from him. We have nothing to discuss. Agreed. The redhead all but bit out. She's clearly made her choice. No, Naruto tilted his head. I happen to think the 3 of you have a great deal to talk about. 3. Emerald slipped in behind them, a sullen Alia slung over her shoulder. She didn't so much walk as she did stalk, bodily storming over to Blake, and all but slamming the little chameleon faunus into the seat beside her. Just like Blake, she too looked fit to protest. She subsided only. Adam struggled only a little, but the blonde's grip was ironclad. He let himself be wrestled towards a chair. Blake burst to her feet. You're supposed to be on my side. We are. Pyrrha materialized behind her and pushed her back into her seat. But we need to hear them out as well. An arm came down on Elia's shoulder, guiding the subdued girl into the fourth and final chair. None of us are leaving this room until we settle things. And if we don't want to. Naruto frowned and air grew oppressive, choking the words in his throat. Was it just his imagination, or were those blue orbs glowing? No, surely not. Was it warm in here? No, surely not. Emeralds definitely weren't on fires as well. The wind certainly wasn't picking up, and those certainly weren't sparks shooting from their fingers. Right? Oh, hell. Something told him he wouldn't be leaving alive if he resisted. You don't seem to understand. Naruto spoke slowly, the words a low growl. This isn't a game. I'm tired of dancing around this. His pale arm rose, cradling in a sheer sphere of light or flame he knew not, only that he didn't want to be hit by it. Now, be a good boy and sit the fuck down. Oh, and if you breathe a word of this to anyone, we'll have to kill you. Emerald's smile was all teeth. We didn't want that now, would we? Yes, sir. Adam sat right the hell down like the good little boy he was. Blake all but wilted as Ilia whimpered and clung onto her. Traitor! For once, Blake didn't try to fight her off. Emerald hummed and leaned back against the door, effectively trapping them in the room. Those bloody red flames still burned from her eyes, promising violence if any of them decided to abstain. See, Naruto took his own seat and steeped his fingers. Isn't it nice when we all get along? Now, let's talk. Ilia's voice warbled as she broke first. Blake lasted nearly 30 seconds. Adam managed a full minute. He still gave in. And so passed a month. Maria Calavera was no stranger to controversy. She was the one who often caused it. After all, be it with that nattering nag, Cordovan, or anyone else, she delighted in causing chaos. Why, you ask? Because it warmed her old bones and made her feel young again. That, and she was basically a chaotic neutral these days. Really, when you were her age, you had to live a little. Life was boring otherwise. Still, when she received a curious call from a dear friend, because all old people knew each other, don't you know? It's a thing. She didn't exactly hurry over. It took the better part of a month merely to make her way to Vel, and another week besides to hobble her way to Beacon. She wasn't exactly impressed by the welcome she received at that. Its hallowed halls were a bust with people, students and teachers alike, none of which seemed keen to make way for an old woman with a cane. Well, said cane was technically part scythe, but still, it was the principle of the matter. Bunch of young whippersnappers didn't know how good they had it. Must be nice being young, being able to spring around without popping a hip. Finally, after someone nearly bowled her over and slammed her into a wall without so much as an apology, she decided enough was enough. Hold it right there, missy. She rounded on the next individual she saw and hooked her ankle with her cane. I want a word with you. Credit where it was due. They didn't simply fall over. They narrowly managed to catch themselves on the wall and pivot to the last instant. Good reflexes, this one. Excuse me? A girl with striking red hair and lovely green eyes stopped short. Sure, Arthur, make fun of the elderly again, why don't you? To block at her. Did you need something? Her unfaltering manners caught the ex-huntress flat-footed. How polite. Shaken off her stupor, Maria blinked once with her false eyes, leaned on her cane, and straightened as much as her hunched spine would allow. What I need are directions to Beacon Tower. I don't suppose you know the way. The tower. Oh, those keen eyes lit up. You must be Freya's friend. In the flesh. Well, most of it. She tapped a finger to her false eyes. Bit of a bad joke, that. I'm so sorry. At last the poor girl had the good grace to appear chagrined. I thought you were wearing sunglasses. Maria snorted. You're a polite little thing, aren't you? What's your name? Pyrrha? Maria beamed up at her. Well then, Miss Nikos, by all means lead the way. Naruto removed his gloves with a put-upon sigh. You owe me for this. I know. Freya threw her arms around his neck and kissed his cheek. Thank you. No, really. A slow beat crept up his cheek as he did his best not to look down. You absolutely owe me for this. Piercing blue eyes fixed on Osmond behind his desk. I don't appreciate being dragged out of classes just to satisfy your curiosity. Quite all right. The headmaster indulged him with a patient smile. I'll see your team passes the year with flying colors for this. Well, that was outright bribery. Not that he was against it. And sold. He capitalized with a grin. Freya released him at last, allowing him to pivot and turn his gaze back towards the elevator doors. Now, where's this friend of yours? She should have been here away. She should have been her way here by now. I thought you said she made it here. The vault door swept open with a low ding. Pyrrha waved cheerfully from within. Hello, Miss Nikos. Osmond hummed but a little. Thank you for guiding her here. You may return to your classes. Naruto flicked Pyrrha a commiserating glance. I'll only be a few minutes. Don't worry. Tell Emerald I'm sorry for keeping her. For a moment it looked as though the redhead would protest. She was growing increasingly willful as of late, but in the end she capitulated with a bow. Unfortunately, that left the three of them alone with a rather, well, let's just say an interesting individual and be done with it, shall we? I'm here, hold your horses. An old woman in dark navy robes shuffled out as the doors closed, leaning heavily upon a cane. Well, what in blazes is so important that you had to drag me half across Remnant? Naruto brow shot straight into his hairline. This is the one. She's a defenseless old woman. At least you could swing a staff before. Ah, I know. I aged like a fine wine. Would have been here sooner if I hadn't run into a little old phoenix up in Argus. Wait a minute. The woman's brow furrowed as the rest of his words caught up to her. I'm not defenseless, just a little hard of hearing and blind without my eyes that are in desperate need of repair. Naruto quirked a brow. Okay, she grimaced. I'm starting to see your point. Maria Calavera at your service. Now, would someone tell me where Freya is? Freya stiffened a smile behind her hand. Why don't you see for yourself? Fine, twist my leg, why don't you? Maria sighed, straightened her aching back, and squinted up with her mechanical eyes. Alright, I'll bite. Where the heck is Freya? You look different. Her words warped into a startled bleat as she beheld the maiden herself, no longer lurking in the shadows. The revived maiden preened with a smirk. Notice that yourself, did you? Maria looked left. Maria looked right. Maria blinked. I feel like I'm missing something here. The explanation that followed proved a brief one, and not without questions. So let me get this straight. The wizened woman straightened her back with an audible pop. You! She flicked a gnarled finger at Naruto. Use your semblance to make her. The trembling digit flicked back to a grinning Freya. Young again. She hooked her thumb and stabbed it towards her chest. And now you want to do the same to me? Naruto grimaced. Please don't say it like that. Quite, Austin finished with a sigh of his own. I'd forget how incredibly crass she could be. Well, sign me up, Maria grinned. I can't wait to rub this in Cordovan's face. Ha! Oh, it'll be priceless. Naruto squinted. Cordovan? Freya sighed. Bet you don't know. I'll take your word for it. So, are we doing this? In a sense, this was just as much an experiment for him as it was her. He'd fed his semblance on not just grim, but on condemned criminals at Osmond's request, real scum of the earth, and only in small amounts, never enough to kill, but enough to swell his resolve. All the same, life force was still life, regardless of what or whom you took it from. But who knew how it worked? Not him. So he did let himself on life energy until he felt fist to burst. His new powers fed off it, becoming stronger still. Even now his hands were all but trembling from the excess energy. If this was a process he could respect safely without expending his life force, well, sure, that was worth looking into, even if that attained having Ironwood and Ospen looking over his shoulders at the moment. He caught them staring and shrugged them. If he was going to have a fresh start, might as well make it a secure one. In hindsight, he wasn't sure whether it would work. After all, Maria was so much older than Freya and weaker for it. Her body was stooped and stunted, shrunken by age and in time alike. Her eyes were another matter, one that felt oddly familiar. He could have sworn he'd grown some back someone's eyes before. Hadn't he? Unless as if he'd done so in another life. Still, could he heal that which hadn't been there before? It might not even be possible. Ospen had mentioned something about silver eyes at the time, but he didn't really grasp the finer points of it. Regardless of the outcome, it was something to see. If this worked, if he could repeat this, the possibilities were endless. He and Emerald could live forever. Nothing short of death in battle would stop them, and not even that if they were careful. But now was not the time for such thoughts, as he well knew. To work then. For lack of anything else to say, he gave Maria one last warning when she didn't pull away. Brace yourself. Alright, but if I wake up with a tattoo on my face, I'm blaming you. With a mild laugh, Naruto knelt reverently and reached one hand out for her to grasp. Time to get this show on the road. Truth be told, Maria didn't hold much stock in myths or magic. Make no mistake, she understood that those of the silver eyes were inherently something more than the common semblance, but that was as far as her knowledge went. After all, it wasn't like she'd been granted a mystical vision out of a lamp to explain anything. No, certainly not. But this, well, she'd never believed in miracles either, but beggars couldn't be choosers. After all, you only lived once. Long ago, she'd let her cowardice lead her about by the nose. Not this time. You may experience some mild discomfort. Naruto's words sounded distant, distorted somehow, stilted even as he reached for her, as if another were speaking through him. I'm sorry. Maria reached out and clasped his forearm. My, that's a strong grip you got there! Her words peaked into a startled yelp as liquid fire filled her veins. Well, now, that felt good, really good. Her heart hammered in her ears, a sharp staccato beat that burned her world. There was no pain, only a strange rush of heat that she couldn't quite quantify, like she'd spent too much time out in the sun and got a bad tan. Not painful at all. It was odd, to be sure, but she wasn't sure why they were acting as if she'd wind up dead or worse. And then she felt it. Yow! Scarlet sparks raced down his arm and into hers. Her body didn't simply change, it jolted. Maria shot back as if she'd been struck by lightning. Heat and steam burst into the air, eliciting a gasp from everyone present. Her back struck a wall and left a decidedly Maria-shaped expression behind. Muted laughter greeted her ears. Well now, Freya giggled. So that's what it looks like from the outside. Osmond swore softly. Remarkable. Ah, hell. She regarded Naruto's groan. I think you took too much. Might have sent you back farther than I intended. Maria coughed into the smoke. How far? Oh dear, her voice. She looked down, blinked. Her vision was blurry, and it took a bit of squinting before she realized something. She could see. Gone was the faint blue haze that had come with her artificial eyes. Even now, she could see the brilliant device sprattled at her feet. In its place, the world was bright. So bright. She fumbled for her cane and displayed its blade. A startled reflection gazed back at her within the polished metal. This was not quite her prime, but it wasn't far from it either. Her once loose robes had been stretched to their limit. Beneath them, her once wrinkled skin was soft as satin. As she ran a hand over it, marveling at her limbs. Nor were they the only changes. Her long grey hair had flown free from its braid, now a rich shade of chestnut brown, cascading down her back. Not to mention other things were, well, everything was in the right places. Bloody hell, the young girl blinked back at her as she cupped her chest. Stark silver eyes blinked back at her. I feel good, really good. Just how hard did you hit me? Naruto scratched the back of his head as the haze faded. Maybe a little too hard by the look of you. Cordovan was going to be green with envy. Insufferable little midget that she was. Ha! She'd never believe this. Maria pivoted anew, considering herself. Maybe she had gone back a bit too far. She'd peg herself in her late teens at best, and while that both rankled her pride, it also brought relief. No one recognized her like this. No one to know her. No one to recognize her or hunt her. She stood to her full height, mildly annoyed when her head barely came to his chin. In the end, she could only complain of one thing. Blast it, you're still taller than me. Naruto threw his head back with a peal of wild laughter. That's what you're worried about. Maria didn't give him a chance to embrace her any further than that. In a single seamless movement, she grabbed his face and dragged his mouth to hers. Previews. Emerald, are you mad? No, she tossed her head. Why would you be mad? Naruto winced. Because you look mad. Really, really mad. Coco, I need your help. Sure thing, sugar lips. What'd you need? How do I get a boy to ask me out on a date? Ha, you've come to the right place. Right this way, my apprentice. Where's your boy at? He's got an appointment to keep. Emerald was not pleased at the moment. Naturally, her displeasure stemmed from many things. For one, she had another challenger. Coco clapped slowly. You came to the right person. Ain't nobody better than me when it comes to fashion. Emerald twitched. I'm already regretting this. Nonsense. The brunette sang and spun her around. Now let's get you ready for your date. The closet swung open, revealing an array of dresses. What are those? Your outfits. You didn't think you were going out in that, did you? The sprite came out in a whirl of green. Love it, grab her. Huh? Maria did a little twirl, admiring herself in uniform. Always did want to try my luck at a Huntsman Academy. Emerald balked. We can't have a fifth member. Why ever not? Osmond quirked a brow. We can always give her a false surname. It wouldn't do for the world to know who she is. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Roman. You can leave now. We'll let you live. Nah, I don't think so. Melodicodo came up, ready to fire at the slightest provocation. Turn out your wallets. Valuables first. Emerald looked left. Emerald looked right. Emerald set her menu down. Is he threatening us? Naruto grinned. I think he is. Been a while since someone did that. I'm not letting him ruin our date. No, I get that. But he might be useful. Crack! Roman sailed back, spitting death. Emerald stormed after him. Naruto sighed and called for his locker. Guess we're doing this now. He heard glass shatter behind him and flipped the table. A thin blade pierced through it. It was the only warning he received before he heard the sound of shattering glass. A sharp heel crashed into the side of his head, but snapping his neck to one side. He rode the blow, caught them by the thigh, and slammed them into the floor. Vicious little thing, aren't you? Neapolitan blinked up at him with wide eyes. Then he smacked her through the floor. End of chapter 12.